Good morning, everyone. Thank you all who are here, and thank you to those who will be watching this in the near future. Thank you for joining Nat and I in our third conversation, or third morning conversation, I should say, with the leading candidates for the Office of Controller. And this morning, we are very pleased to be speaking with David Weprin. I'm Paul Lewis. I'm president of the Architecture League, principal at LTL Architects, and professor at the School of Architecture in Princeton. And I'm joined by Nat Oppenheimer, who's the treasurer of the Architecture League, structural engineer, and senior vice president at SILMAN, and I can say with great confidence, a lifelong New York expert. So for the candidates' benefit, I want to note that the Architecture League's mission is to stimulate thinking, debate, and action on the critical design and building issues of our time. And it is highly likely that the city will face significant financial challenges in the near term, and we feel it is crucial that we play an active role in facilitating dialogue between the design community and the candidates. And in short, the city's controller plays a critical role in the city's financial situation. And given that both the mayor and the controller will be new to their respective offices, there's a real possibility that the candidate you'll hear today will be a leading figure in the success or failure, hopefully the success, of the city's recovery in the coming years. Just very quickly to set the context for today's discussion, the city's controller's primary roles are to audit the city's finances and performances, providing kind of comprehensive oversight of the city's budget and fiscal condition. The controller audits some aspect of every city agency once every 4 years, and probably kind of with great power, the ability to serve as a fiduciary of the city's 5 public pension funds, about $250 billion. So whether it's obvious or not, the controller's work is likely to influence almost every conversation around the city's recovery over the next few years. So without further ado, I want to introduce the candidate who has been gracious enough to share this morning, time with us this morning, David Weprin. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you here this morning. And very quickly, by way of introduction, Assemblymember Weprin has had a long career in finance and politics, serving on the City Council and the New York State Assembly, and holding various positions in major financial service firms. Since 2010, David has served as the State Assembly member representing the 24th District, which includes Northeast Queens. And prior to his election to the State Assembly, Weprin served on the City Council representing the 23rd District in Queens. And in the private sector, David occupied a variety of leadership positions at major financial services firms, including Stern Brothers, Advest, and Pearson. He also served on the state's banking board, where he regulated and analyzed over 3,000 financial service firms and institutions. And he has lived in Hollis, Jamaica area his entire life. So welcome, David. Really wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Paul, for that very interesting introduction, and very, very gracious. And you know, I should probably sit down after that introduction, but it's great to be here. Do you want me to give a reason why I'm running for controller?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, I think one of the first things we like to ask people is, you know, what is your vision for the city? Why are you running for this position? You've been in public service for much of your life, and you really understand the complexity of New York City and politics in New York City better than most. So what is your vision of the city, and how does the position of the controller, how do you use that to strive for that vision?
Well, you know, I'm running for controller to put the needs of working class and middle class families front and center. I also want to protect the pensions of over 700,000 New York City retirees, one of which is my mother, who's 91 years old. She was a Cuban Jewish immigrant to this country. She went to our public schools. She became a public high school teacher, and now she has a city pension. I also want to play a major role in bringing the city back, the city that I love back from this COVID-19 fiscal crisis, a crisis that we're actually going to be in for at least 3, 4, 5 more years. This year, we got help from Washington, so we will not have a major budget problem at the city level when they do their budget July 1st. And we didn't have a problem when we did our state budget in April, but we will have a major problem, probably $4 or $5 billion deficit over the next few years. And there's going to be a lot of tough decisions that need to be made. And we need a lot of people working together. I'm actually committed to opening up borough offices in every borough, and to have those borough offices focus on small businesses who have been particularly devastated during this pandemic. Over 50% of the jobs in New York City are from small businesses, and we really have to bring small businesses back before we can bring back the economy. I'm committed to using those offices to help with financial services for businesses, and also to access various programs that are available from the federal government, from the state government, from the city government with the pandemic. I'm also committed to to take the fiduciary obligation of the pension funds, as you mentioned, totaling over $250 billion cumulatively. And I'm committed to get the best returns on the assets, not to use the pension funds for political statements, but certainly to make sure that we get a healthy return. The pensioners are guaranteed a 7% return. And if for some reason, and they have in many years fallen below 7%, it's up to New York City's budget to make up the difference. And when you're anticipating a multi-billion-dollar deficit over the next few years, and add on to that, that you have to make up the difference between the 7% return and what the return is, that could be very problematic, could result in budget cuts, could result in layoffs, could be a similar situation to the 1970s. And I don't think anybody wants to see that. So I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Yeah. So let's follow on this kind of question of using the pension funds to make political statements. You've argued that you want to kind of influence corporations to a kind of furtherance of a green agenda to combat climate change. Would you argue that making a kind of clear divestment, is that a political statement where someone has crossed the line, moving and using the pension funds more politically than financially? What do you mean exactly by that claim?
Well, you're one of three citywide elected officials. You certainly have a bully pulpit. You should be taking positions on important issues affecting the city, the state, and the country. But when it comes to the investment of the pension funds, my primary responsibility and my primary focus will be on getting the best returns. In the case of the fossil fuel divestment, which is taking place with the agreement of 3 of the 5 pension funds, that I support that. It'll be an interesting comparison to the other 2 pension funds that have not divested from fossil fuel, the police and fire, and I would not overly force them to do that. It actually creates a unique opportunity for a basis of comparison to see how what alternatives investments are being made from the divestment of the fossil fuel companies, and we could see how they compare in return, and then make a decision. If the divestment results in better returns based on alternatives investments, then that's a good thing, and that's a strong argument to make to the other 2 pension funds. But I think it should be primarily guided by the return on the assets.
So could you talk a little bit more about what are the ways in which you want to use the pension to kind of influence corporations? What are the other measures if you're kind of using divestment of fossil fuels as a kind of test case to see whether it still adheres to return? What are the other measures that you would want to put in place to ensure a kind of green agenda?
Again, it's the basis is still, what's the best return, and if you're investing in companies of the future, companies that are green companies that are good for the environment, that could be good for investments as well. So it's a question of focus, but my primary focus would be on trying to get the best returns, especially when we're still in a fiscal crisis and anticipating multi-billion-dollar deficits.
Nat, I think you wanna, we're gonna go back and forth. So
yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in and thank you very much, David, for your time this morning. I think I appreciate what you're saying about the funds, and as an engineer, I like the idea of having a baseline to test off of. So I appreciate that view of things. In terms of and pivoting a little bit, so to a political issue, and maybe not one that the comptroller will directly, have a specific voice in, but one that you'll have a strong voice in the background and in the foreground times. In terms of Rikers and the 5-borough and the borough jail system master plan, I think it was costed around or estimated around $8.6 billion. I do not believe, and we might be wrong, that you've taken a strong position one way or the other for or against, but I'm curious as to where you are and where you see the comptroller's role in those conversations over the coming years as that becomes a central issue.
Well, the controller is in charge of the debt issuance of the city, and the borough-based jails will be, built with bonds and capital projects. So, and that's something I did on Wall Street for 25 years with major firms. So, I'm familiar with that. The prison population has been significantly reduced from when the plan was contemplated. I think it's important that there is community input in those borough-based jails, and they also be evaluated for the scale, the scope. I think it should be an ongoing discussion with community input, but I do support closing Rikers. That train has kind of left the station already. There've been many problems, at Rikers, and I think borough-based jails are the answer, but the question is to the scale of the jails and whether they're going to have significant community input or not, and discussions with size and location. I'm not committed to the current locations that have been identified, but I'm certainly open to it.
I appreciate that. And in terms of bonds and financing and so on, again, to a related topic, well, not related really, but related in terms of the built environment for us. In terms of housing, you've talked about middle and lower class New Yorkers and so on. And one of the issues that you're deeply involved in has been fairness in property tax, from what I understand. Do you link that push in your career and fairness in property tax and so on with how one might see supporting and financing? You talked about weatherizing, housing, auditing NYCHA, new affordable housing. So do you link those two, or are they two separate things? And again, in the role of comptroller, different from your previous role and prior roles, how do you see yourself leveraging that role to better manage, the financing and the money that goes into getting a lot of these ideas built and completed in New York?
Yeah, well, a lot will come out of the audit function, and one of the major functions, as was pointed out, is for the controller to audit the city agencies which are under the control of the mayor, and to suggest changes in operations as well through performance audits. The city charter, as was pointed out, only requires the controller to audit every city agency, an aspect of every city agency, once every 4 years. As far as I'm concerned, that's certainly not frequent enough. I think we should be looking to audit every city agency every year. Also, there's every agency has a large outside contracting budget, and some of those large outside contracts have not been sufficiently audited. So I'd like to see auditing them, and I think you'll find a lot of savings. You'll find a lot of efficiency that can be done through those audits. So I think the audit function is a very important function in the check and balances of the controller over the mayor and the mayor's agencies. So I'm committed to a very active auditing schedule, and and more frequent schedule than has currently been done over the last number of years.
So I want to continue with the question of affordable housing, because obviously as the Architecture League, we're super interested in housing and how it gets kind of played out and realized. You had mentioned that you would use the economically targeted investments program, which has been in place since 1980, in the 80s. What would you do differently from the current controller and those that came before him? In other words, how do you approach the complex issue of housing from the controller's perspective? What are the ways that we can move forward productively on this issue?
Well, as you pointed out, the economically targeted investment allows you to invest up to 2% of the assets in targeted areas. What I would like to focus in the housing area is partnering with developers, for-profit developers or not-for-profit developers to build more affordable housing and specifically focus on housing for our city employees. There's a major problem, and there's always criticisms of firefighters and police officers often not living in the city, although more and more in the last number of years, there've been more police officers and firefighters living in the city. About 60% of police now live in the city. But the reason they haven't lived in the city traditionally is that housing is expensive. And I think we want to encourage, our public servants to live in the city. In the case, especially in the case of police and fire, we want to have them, live in the communities that they work in and that they service. So I think we can increase affordable housing for city employees through that program, partnering with developers, and that could be a win-win because that could achieve the goal of finding affordability for our city employees as well. I would also go away from the shelter system. I mean, we've invested too many billions of dollars in warehousing homeless people and not getting them the services. Certainly, there can be more permanent housing with services for formerly homeless people, and that could be used as well. But primarily, I would like to build middle class and affordable housing targeted at New York City employees.
So obviously, housing is a perpetual question, right? I mean, New York City is the history of New York City is a kind of history of housing and vice versa. In your kind of career in the public sector, what would you argue to be one of your successes relative to the question of housing?
Well, we've in the private sector, I was involved in in many bond issues for housing, multifamily housing, I would say in my legislative career, we've passed a lot of legislation, both in the city council and the state legislature to make it easier, to build housing. And, one of the complaints I've gotten is, there are a lot of agencies in the city. A buildings department, is one of the ones that I get the most complaints about, that they create problems for development. They create problems, for people trying to build housing, whether it be either residential or commercial projects, and it's created problems. I think we have to streamline the process. We have to make it more business friendly and make it easier for development in New York City, which would include housing as well.
Are there particular kind of inefficiencies in the DOB or the DDC that you would want to kind of reform?
Well, yeah, I'd like to get in there, obviously, but that's certainly anecdotally one of the agencies that we get the most complaints on. Basically, it just seems that it's built into the system is people feel they have to hire expediters, hire lobbyists to do any project, when you're dealing with government, that shouldn't be the case. It really, ideally, it should be business friendly. The principals should be able to deal directly with the building department without having expediters, and it shouldn't take years to get projects done. It just seems very inefficient system in New York City, and I think I'd like to use that audit function to get to the bottom of it and try to make it easier to get projects done.
Yeah, and I think to follow up on that from the private to the public, with DDC and the work done by the city for the city, how do you see that agency and again, your experience as a public official dealing perhaps with budgets and DDC and so on? Do you have thoughts on what you would see your role in auditing and maybe helping to streamline the DDC work?
Well, I just know, when it comes to building schools, and I know that from my experience in the city council as well as libraries, it just seems that the cost overruns, are always over budget, and they're always out of hand, and they're almost always never on time. It just seems there's got to be a more efficient way, to build schools, to build libraries. There are just too many, problems along the way, and the buildings department, and Department of Environmental Protection, even the fire department, are often, obstructionists along the way, and it seems to me that it has to be a way to streamline the process where it shouldn't take as long as it does, and there shouldn't be so many hurdles in the process.
I want to go back real quick to one of the points you made, and again, if it's a position that's changed, by all means, correct me. But I think in the past, you've not been a big fan of congestion pricing. You brought up the issue of bringing cops and firefighters into New York with affordable housing, which is a really intriguing idea, and bringing people back to the communities they serve. In that context of more of the people who work in New York living in New York, would that, sort of jive with the position on congestion pricing, that it becomes less of a burden on the workers in New York who drive in, that's more of their choice than something they have to live outside the city for affordability if the housing is there?
Well, part of the problem with congestion pricing is there are parts of New York City, and I've represented one of those parts in the city council and the assembly, are transit deserts where there are no subways. Eastern Queens, the nearest subway from east, bordering on the Nassau border where my district goes, is about 5 miles to the nearest subway. And there are some bus lines, but there are also places in Eastern Queens that are not on a bus line. And you often have to take 2 buses and a train to get into Manhattan. And that's often a 2-hour commute from Eastern Queens. And most people would rather just drive, even though it's more expensive. You can still get into Manhattan in an hour, even with traffic from Eastern Queens, as opposed to a potential 2-hour commute. So clearly we have to do a lot in our transit system to make it more attractive. We need more express buses. We need more bus lines. We need more access to public transportation. I'm also concerned about, I was concerned and still am, about the effect of congestion pricing on small businesses that rely on multiple deliveries, rely on the free bridges now, because in a sense, the way the latest plan is, it's almost going to be as if you're tolling the free bridges because it's only below 60th Street, which is really the area where all the free bridges are, the Queensboro Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, which have been free for over 100 years. So I'm not, and we did get multi-billion-dollar bailout from Washington of the MTA. When they termed the coin congestion pricing, it was really kind of mislabeled, in my opinion, because it wasn't aimed at reducing congestion. What it was aimed at is basically a tax to help the MTA. And if that's the case, then call it that. And I think it was misleading to call it congestion pricing. But that did pass, even though I objected to it in the process. It did pass, but I think we have to proceed with caution until we're out of this pandemic. I'd like to see it at least some relief, on the congestion tax or pricing, if you want to call it, until we're totally out of this pandemic and until small business starts coming back. And a lot of people are still hesitant to take the subway. It hasn't, the pandemic has not helped, and I think a lot of it starts with public safety. I mean, we've had too many incidents, of crimes on the subway and acts of violence, and I think we really it's had such a huge effect on tourism, on everything. I think we have to first and foremost get a handle on public safety before we can do any of these things. So I'm committed to not defunding the police, but actually increasing police patrolling in many areas that have been a problem. And as you know, gun violence has spiked up all over the city, and that's a problem. And I think we have to focus it. That's primarily a job of the mayor, but it becomes an economic issue because it affects tourism, it affects the economy, it affects the tax base. So I think we have to get a handle on public safety.
Yeah, I want to continue on the question of congestion pricing, because I actually agree that it's probably mislabeled, but more from the standpoint that I think that it's less about congestion, but about trying to find a way to rethink what the role of the streets are, like trying to make the streets not be about complete dominance of the automobile, particularly the gas-driven gas-powered automobiles. So I guess one of the questions that I would have, and that kind of links a little bit back to the longer term effects of the use of fossil fuels, and how do you see the kind of role of public space, streets in the city, particularly as they've been so radically changed by the effects of COVID, the open kind of restaurants, the changes to the pressures that are coming about radically rethinking what we do with our streets and our public spaces and our sidewalks. What are your thoughts about what might evolve in the coming years that might be kind of catalyzed by the changes that have occurred over the past year?
Yes, I think we need more public spaces, no question. We need alternatives to people driving their cars, but until we get the transportation system sufficiently servicing all New Yorkers, I don't think that's going to happen. And I think there's still too many New Yorkers that rely on their car for work, for medical appointments. There are a lot of people with disabilities that cannot access public transportation, and they need their car. So I think it's certainly we need more recreational area. We need more parks. We need more open space. But I think there still is always going to be a place for people in New York City that do drive cars, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
I think so. I want to, in terms of the way you see the Office of Comptroller, you're one of the few candidates with, a lot of diverse life experience and work experience in terms of both the private and public sector. You're going from a constituency-based audience in your life as an elected official into one with a staff of, I think, approximately about 800 people. I know there's a lot of different departments, but it's still a large staff to run, and it's really about inspiring your staff rather than your constituents directly, even though you're elected into office. Throughout your career, having held both these roles of private and public, how do you see running the comptroller's office? Do you have examples where you feel that, and you don't necessarily need to name names, but that there were people that ran it and used the position better than others, or people who failed to use the position well that you've learned from? What's your basic view on the sort of governance of the office and how you see it operating in the city?
Well, there are about 760 employees. I did serve as Deputy Superintendent of Banking for New York State under Mario Cuomo in the 80s. And we had a banking department of about 500 to 600 employees at the time. So, and it was a lot of different divisions. So I have been involved in the management. That was a while ago, but it certainly was relevant experience. There's you know, a lot of you know, ways to, it is departmentalized, and I would like to see some of these borough offices you know, dealing with some of the divisions. You know, there's a community outreach division in the controller's office. There are actually 14 different units in the controller's office. Some of those units could work with the borough offices, you know, to provide you know, basic community outreach. But you know, I certainly you know, think it's a large office. There's no question. It needs management, but I think we really have to you know, get a handle on you know, on the operations, and you know, that's one of the reasons why I'd like to make it more, you know, 5 borough centric as opposed to just Manhattan centric, and really kind of bring the controller's office to the people.
Can you talk a little bit more about what the differences between the 5 borough your model, where they're the kind of local offices, what they would be doing that would be different than the kind of current kind of centralized model? What in terms of day-to-day activities, how do these things relate?
Well, again, we're in a very, you know, unique time in our city's history. We're in, you know, going to be at a turning point, you know, in this fiscal crisis. And I would certainly use those borough offices to help small businesses and other, you know, companies, you know, come back from this pandemic to access financial services in underserved communities, and particularly access various programs that are now available due to COVID-19, either programs at the federal level, at the state level, as well as the city level. And we could use those borough offices to get that information out to the public, to the community. So, you know, you know, it's a unique idea. It's something new, but it's certainly something that I think might be better suited to getting the public involved in how the controller's office can help them, you know, recover from the pandemic.
Can you talk a little bit more about what your biggest worry about the future of New York is?
My biggest worry is, you know, the economy coming back from the pandemic, you know, the potential deficits, and now I'm particularly concerned with public safety, which is going to have has had an effect on tourism, has had an effect, you know, on the economy. You know, again, I think we need to. We've lost 3,000 police officers over the last year. A lot of it has to do with the city council, you know, defund the police movement and cutting $1 billion, you know, out of the police budget. You know, whether it was a real $1 billion or not, you know, that's you can argue that, but you can't argue that we're down 3,000 police officers from a year ago, and there has to be some correlation between that and the spike in crime throughout the city. And we're coming into the summer. That's something I'm particularly concerned about. I think it could potentially get worse, you know, in the summer. So I think it's something that we really have to get a handle on.
These are a lot of these concerns are very, you know, in a sense, kind of short term. Like, do you have a worry about the city in 10 years from now? Like, what are the things we're doing now that we think we're going to have really regret in 10 years?
Good question. I mean, I'm not, you know, I think we have to focus, you know, on this recovery and not 10 years. You know, I think we have to, you know, worry about the environment, but I think we need long-term planning. And I think, you know, we can certainly bring everybody together. I know when Mayor Bloomberg came in, he had some long-term plans for the future. A lot of them have not taken place yet, but certainly I think we should bring all the experts together and see what kind of planning we can have. But I don't want to sound short-sighted, but I think we really have to deal with the immediate crisis and spend the next couple of years really, getting us through this fiscal crisis and bringing New York City back.
Well, actually, in that context, which I do appreciate, there's a short and the long term. And again, one of the things that we saw in your statements and careers also discussing under the comptroller auditing NYCHA and looking at climate change as it applies to maybe it's recladding. I think there's a term, weatherizing NYCHA housing and affordable housing and so on. That's the kind of stuff in terms of NYCHA housing where every year we don't invest, it just adds 10 years of budget fixing things up. Every year of deferred maintenance often cripples the organization and how we look at housing that exists. Do you have any thoughts in terms of balancing those immediate needs and the fiscal crisis with sort of NYCHA's role and making sure that somehow we keep these buildings functional and even invest in them while we're investing in short-term needs so that we're not paying 10 times the amount 10 years from now?
Yeah, that is a problem. There's no question that NYCHA's been mismanaged and underinvested and has not had the capital infusion from the federal government. And I know the state and the city have tried to do some of the capital funding that for years of neglect, but I don't think we're there yet, and there's still major problems with roofs, with lead poisoning, with also mold and so many other issues specifically with NYCHA. There's no question that there needs to be more regular audits of NYCHA by the controller's office and have a plan to redo it. When NYCHA was first started, it was almost an entry for people into the middle class. It was state-of-the-art housing and started out as a very attractive place to live. Someone kind of an entry into the middle class. That's no longer the case anymore, and I don't think people can argue against that. And you have crime problems as well. So and a lot of it has to do with historic underinvestment in NYCHA over the years. So I think a lot has to be done. I'm not sure privatizing NYCHA, which has been proposed, is the answer, because I think there is some importance of having a public element to it. But I certainly think there could be a partnership with the private sector to reimagine, if you want, NYCHA housing, but with community facilities, which they have, and to try to expand on those. But I think right now, NYCHA is in a crisis, and I think we really have to, deal with it with some of the problems as much as we can. And I don't see throwing billions of dollars, just money, at NYCHA is going to solve the problem. I think there has to be more long-term planning, and more long-term management, ideas. So I'm not sure what the answer is on NYCHA, but certainly we really have to do a lot when it comes to bringing back NYCHA and trying to make it what it was when it was first started.
Yeah, you mentioned, and you mentioned, and it's definitely the dynamic in the city of city, state, federal funds, how they all support in different ways and then don't support in other ways. Having served both city and state roles, do you see areas, again, in the role of comptroller where you might be able to influence better working and efficiency between city and state in ways where you might have that ability?
I would certainly try. I mean, I would also try to bring in, some of the experts who have been involved, in this area for a long time. But I think there is a room, and there already is in the case of NYCHA. There have been, capital invested over the years, from the city council. There's been capital invested from the state level. And of course, the primary aid is really, from Washington. So I think it has to be a combination. I think you probably need an overall czar to kind of marshal, the coordination when it comes to NYCHA between the city, state, and federal government. And I think there have been ideas about that, but I don't think it's effectively taken place or been done. And I think that really should be looked at seriously.
I know we're getting down to our last few minutes, so I want to ask a little bit more of a general question, which is, how would you distinguish your candidacy from your competitors? Like, where do you feel you stand out and distinguish yourself?
Well, of all the candidates, I'm the only one that really has relevant finance experience, not only in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. I was on Wall Street in municipal finance for 25 years with major firms. I was deputy superintendent of banking for New York State for 4 years. And I was chair of the finance committee of the city council for 8 years. In the city council, I've been in the assembly now for 11 years. I chair the corrections committee, but I've been on the ways and means committee as well. So I don't think anybody running for controller has that kind of background. And I think that background is going to be needed now more than ever as we go into this upcoming fiscal crisis, which hasn't really even started. As I mentioned, we're okay for this year because of aid, which we deserve because we were underfunded for so many years. I mean, I don't know if you remember Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who used to head the finance committee, and from New York, used to always do an annual study about how much New York City and New York State contributed to the federal government in taxes versus what they got back in services. And we were always short in the billions every year. That has changed now a little bit. And I think we deserve the aid we got. I think we were entitled to it. We were the beginning of the pandemic and we suffered the most economically. But I think it's important that we have somebody with my background, and again, I'm committed to making bringing the city back and handling $250 billion of pension money and hiring the best advisors as well.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
No. All you. So I think the last two questions. So.
No, I thought we were running short on time, so I was going to just say thank you very much, actually. And given that that's your vision of what differentiates you, I think that's a good spot to probably to end, unless you'd like to add anything further, because this has been, I just want to thank you again for your time this morning from the league, and have you and Paul have the last word. But we really appreciate the conversation, and it's been great just to talk to each of the candidates and get into these details, because it is going to be significant. These are significant issues for the future of the city, and we all very much love the city. So thank you again. But Paul, I'll let you have the last word.
My last question is, what have we not asked you, or what would you want to leave us with as final words?
Final words that, I feel I'm in a position to play a major contribution in bringing back the city that I love. When I chaired the finance committee, I was in a similar situation when I first came into the city council in 2002 and immediately became finance chair. We were just post 9/11. We had one of the worst fiscal crisis with the devastation in downtown, the loss of jobs, the loss of revenue, and we actually brought the city back, and we actually turned a multi-billion-dollar deficit into a surplus. And then we were doing well, and then we had the 2008, 2009 recession on Wall Street, and I chaired the finance committee through that. We did something that hasn't been done under the de Blasio administration, which is the PEG program, the plan to end the gap and close. And we had an exercise every year of every city agency about where we could have savings, where we could have cuts. We didn't always, finish those cuts, but we certainly planned ahead. And I think we should be hesitant on spending all the stimulus money at once. We can spend it over 3 years. I certainly, am concerned about not having a plan to save money and to, plan for future deficits. And that's something I'm going to be concentrating on and would focus on as controller.
Well, thank you very much, David. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. I know we're all committed to the better version of New York City as it moves forward into its future. So we really appreciate this conversation heading in that direction.